materialize? What are the metrics? When you go to a church and say, this church feels really organic, everybody's kind of here naturally, it's good, versus inorganic, right? Manufactured or stiff or fake, right? And so that's a great question we're going to talk about.
So it's not exactly.
Right.
It's not like.
Formal.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right. When I go to a graduation, college or high school, I kind of expect things to go exactly according to the formula, right? And there's a lot of churches that do that, and there is safety and security there. That's not a bad thing. It isn't. It isn't. I think it can go off the rails pretty quick if you don't have those kind of things. But what's really interesting is Paul gave so much advice to the early church about how to keep things from going off the rails, which makes me think that there wasn't that structured liturgy in place. Otherwise, a lot of Paul's advice would have been nonsensical. Does that make sense? Paul is giving very clear instructions on, well, if you have a word, do this. If you are teaching them, do this. If you can get something to say, then you do this. But above all, don't do this and definitely do this. What's he doing? He's helping them form their identity as a church and help them form how do we really do things decently and in order. And as we humans tend to do, we take something good and we run with it. We do that with everything. Everything. I submit to you, find me one thing that is good that we haven't taken to excess to find comfort and security, especially. I think a really good example, abstain from all appears to be, well, we misunderstood that verse. You can find my episode on the podcast called The Forbidden Isles. We butcher that verse. Rip it right out of context and make it our pet. But we go from, I don't want to stumble anyone, I don't want to be seen, parked in front of the strip club when I'm just going in to get a hot dog next door. You know what I mean? Like, who knows, right? But that, we humans said, oh, yes, and we kind of made a religious structure out of that, And I just want to see if we can identify any of those structures in the church and see if they're actually doing more hindrance than our help. So we're going to talk about that. Let's talk about it over some baked potatoes and have ourselves a good Lord's Supper that way. That's another thing to talk about. The Lord's Supper, what is it? How do they practice it in the early church? Hint, it wasn't little goblets or pieces of matzo bread. It was an actual supper. Anyway, hope in the Hevel. Hope in the Hevel. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 46 through chapter 50. Genesis chapter 46 through chapter 50. You can cheat. But what is the event that closed out chapter 45? Chapter 45 ended with something, kind of a high note, right? What's that, Brother Ray? Good news for Jacob. I like that. That's a good song title, actually. Good news for Jacob.
You gotta work on that, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to really take it into the. You don't think it's ready to go just like that, Pete? There you go, right? I have Baby Ruth, Crunch, Mr. Goodbars, M&M, Whoppers, Baby Ruth. I think there's only one Baby Ruth left. With the trajectory, that was a terrible. Oh. Hey, that kind of, yeah, that was a good field goal. I was actually going for the arch, but I didn't do the arch correctly. I'm very.
You gotta go higher.
I know you guys are really counting on me to have that down just right. I know, that's the thing. I also didn't want to beat Dennis in the dome with the Baby Ruth. Right? All right, so good news for Jacob is how it ended. Now, we're going to talk about hope in the Hevel. What is Hevel? If you remember correctly, the Hebrew word Hevel means fleeting breath or vapor, or taken in connotation, meaninglessness, or extremely transitory. Make sense so far? It's found in Ecclesiastes a ton, and it's translated as vanity or vain all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. My go-to book is Ecclesiastes. You say, that's depressing. No way, totally not. Because everything else is depressing. You say, that's dark. Hey, if there's not chapters of your life when just about everything feels depressing, I want some of what you're taking. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, we can't say that in church. All right, so, but for real, we can't be at cloud nine all the time. Sometimes we're on cloud one, cloud negative 16. Ecclesiastes is my go-to book. If you're a guy who literally is looking at life and nihilism is staring you in the face. He's quoting the mantra of nihilism, which is everything's meaningless, there's no point. You say, what happened to this guy? We'd say Solomon, you might catch me saying Solomon. I think it was co-written with some of Solomon's wisdom. The guy called himself a preacher. Could very well be Solomon. I lean towards Solomon. But there's clearly multiple authors, and the book doesn't even shy away from that, but we're not going to get into it here. What is that? Rabbi Yitzhak Tversky, he proposes that in typical Hebrew linguistic fashion, it appears to be wordplay. Oh, we're doing it. I gotta get back to my goodness. Here we go. Hebrew wordplay on the name Abba, Hevel, Abba, same Hebrew letters. Same Hebrew letters. Abel's life is characterized by somebody who did the right thing and his life was still cut short regardless. The concept of nihilism espouses the idea that no matter what, life is meaningless. Have you ever heard of the word annihilation? Nihilism, it's the same principle, right? Everything comes to an end. The preacher, the author of Ecclesiastes, delved into this theme quite deeply in his work of Ecclesiastes. However, as Christians, we maintain that this life and what we do in it matters. I no longer, and have not for a while, espouse the view that if I do really good things, I'll get better content. Is there a possibility? Yes. Does it miss the point? I'm quite sure it does. Because any good work that I do of the Spirit, anyways, I actually maintain the position that there is no Christian. Well, it doesn't matter. This is moving right along. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. I'm not quite certain it is an express blessing reserved for those who do a super good job. I think that is the fact that you made it through life as a Christian. That's pretty good, right? And all the glory goes to God. Anyway, and some seems to be, if we understand. And some Christians will have their work burned up, but they'll be saved so as by fire. But that doesn't mean, I'm quite sure that doesn't mean when they get to heaven, everybody's going to be like, oh yeah, you're here. Yeah, I guess hop on in, you barely made it. No. There's rejoicing for everybody. Come on. Anyway. Now, little ice. Give me just a second. Thanks. There it is. The ice formed in like this little cylinder in the straw, and I was like, I love it. All right. Now, it might seem a little weird to visit a theme like this from the end of Genesis, but I'm persuaded that a proper reading of the text brings this theme to the surface. So let's dig into another series of stories, just like we did last week. Scene one, it's Canaan. Jacob, now the story part's a little shorter. We're going to spend time kind of summing it up. Jacob, now relieved and overjoyed that his son is alive, begins to move to Egypt for shelter and support during the famine. It was only meant to be a sojourn. God visits Jacob in a dream and says, hey, go ahead, feel free, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, because I am going to bring you back home. That is in verse 3. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. I'm going to make a great nation of you there, and I'm going to go down with you into Egypt. So I'm going to be with you when you are in exile. You say, he's not in exile. You'll get it at the end of the lesson. You'll understand this is a huge picture of exile, and God is going to be with Jacob in exile. Hang on to that thought. Everybody good so far? Okay. We just started. All right, good. Get your coffee, buckle in. All right, don't leave your coffee. Don't be distracted. Do whatever you want. All right, I'm going to bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand upon your eye. Now, wait a minute. He says, I'm going to go down with you into Egypt, and I'm going to bring you up. As the King James translator supplies the word again, that's why it's italicized in your Bible. But the principle is you're going to go down into exile, and you're going to come back up out of exile. Hang on to that. We're going to visit that at the very end. Okay. So Jacob and his sons and daughters-in-law and grandchildren all ventured down to Egypt in Pharaoh's wagon with their livestock, their goods. They were going down to sojourn to weather out the storm of famine until they could return home. No member of House Jacob ever considered at this moment, I'm quite sure, of going down to Egypt and staying there for 400 years. It was never the goal. Their motive for going down was to escape famine. But God said, I'm going to make a great nation of you guys while you're down there. That doesn't happen in 5 years. There's 5 years left. Like, well, what's going on? Seems like God may have known something that they didn't, right? Funny how that happens. You can trust God. He does know things you don't. If you don't get anything else out of the lesson, get that. Amen? All right. We're provided with a long list of names in the text, followed by a number. It was 70 members of House Jacob that came down to Egypt. But if you remember in Acts chapter 7, I have it written down. It'll come in a second. Where Stephen is recalling the story, how many people does Stephen say went down to Egypt? This is fun. You guys are going to love this. Go to Acts, would you? If you're not already going to Acts, let me just read this to you. At the very end of the list of names, in Genesis chapter 46, it says, not at the end of the section, verse 26, all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. 66. Okay? Excuse me, 310. Right. Verse 27. Which were born in Egypt were 2 souls, and all the souls of the house of Jacob which came in Egypt were 10. All right, so you see how that works? He starts with 66, counts the others, 10. He landed on 70 as his number. Now, go to Acts. I'm pretty sure it's in chapter 7. But it seems like 7's a little later. Okay. So Acts 7:14, then sent Joseph, Stephen is telling the story. He's doing a bang-up job. He's doing awesome. He's preaching when he's about to die. I want to do that right when I'm about to die. Any last words? Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. Yeah, they pull the trigger. They ain't gonna listen to me. But look at verse 17. But when the time, verse 14, then said Joseph and called his father Jacob to him and all his kindred, 15 souls. So why does Stephen have 75? And Moses and compilers have 70. I've shattered inerrancy and destroyed your faith this morning. I have not. I want to share with you, there's really good ways and really bad ways to see differences in the text. One of the really bad ways is to try to pretend like everything has to reconcile and take really desperate grabs at making things reconcile. You just made the faith look a lot weaker. Give me an example. One day, my grandfather was telling a story about a voodoo doll looking thing that he kept on his mantle. And he was telling my father a story, his son-in-law, my father, a story about how he was sure the thing was like deemed possessed. Somebody gave it to him as a gift, so we didn't get rid of it. It's kind of weird, but whatever. He said, one day I got up and I didn't like the look on his face, so I turned it around. And the next morning I got up and it was already turned back around. Now that's enough for me to burn it. I'm just letting you know right now that I'm done. I don't care if it's a troll. I don't care if it's a Pokemon card. You know what I'm saying? If I do anything like that and it turns back around, you're done. No matter what. Picture of me and my wife. Nope, sorry. Picture going away, So I was very young, and I heard the story. And my grandfather could see I was visibly shaking. Nervous, because it was right there. You know what I mean? I'm in the room with it. I'm freaking out. I tried to hide it. I was pretty cool. Cool story, guys. Hey, let's talk about something else, So my grandfather immediately recognized that he was awesome. I love the guy. And he goes, well, here's what it may have been. We lived by a highway, and so we actually didn't really live anywhere near a highway. He said, and it could be that as the truck went by, it rattled it around, and it kind of turned around. And he could see I didn't buy it. And then he goes, well, it could have been a snake. He really did say this. He goes, it could have been a snake that coiled itself. Right, exactly, right. Coiled itself around it, and then when it uncoiled and left, it turned around. He was making really desperate grabs to try to explain this thing, right? Not everybody's got a creepy story or two by the time you hit 40 or 50, I guess, but he was going to great lengths to try to explain it away, this story he just told my dad, about the statue. And it made it worse because I was like, now you're just being completely ridiculous.
looking for a snake now.
right? When you make these desperate attempts to try to explain something, even though you don't have an answer, it makes you look ineffective, and it makes it look like there really is no answer. Does that make sense? I've seen it happen with Bible scholars all over the place. Some of my favorite Bible scholars have hit some really serious potholes in their studies and in their approach because they're trying to make something make sense that simply doesn't reconcile. My favorite kind of biblical scholar is the one who will look at the facts and say, these don't match up. Rather than say, well, maybe it was this, or maybe it was this, and you squish it together and you end up with a mess. I would rather have somebody just be honest to my face and say, this doesn't match up. Thankfully, today is not one of those cases. There is a very honest and intellectually credible reason, because this might be an objection you haven't even heard of before for the reliability of the scriptures, because it has been answered so soundly. Stephen recalled this as 75 people since he read the Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Septuagint actually incorporated later Talmudic teachings into the canon and would sometimes make changes to include other names that they believed belonged in the text. The Septuagint actually names 5 of Joseph's sons that he had other than Ephraim and Manasseh. And so it names 5 other people that we see here in our text. That's the Masoretic text, the Hebrew text that's been preserved and translated to English. And so what Stephen is reading is the Septuagint, which is Bible, usually plus a little bit of commentary and or perceived needed correction by the Jewish community. Make sense so far? And so Stephen's reading this Greek Old Testament that says 75. He's preaching the Bible he knows. Is it 70? Yes, because there were 70 people that went down to Egypt. Were there 75 if you count Joseph's 5 later sons? Absolutely. Here's why. The standard by which, this is important, by the way, it is. You say it's not, it is. You're going to need this later when somebody brings it up, and you're going to know how to properly reconcile things in Scripture without sounding like a dunce. That make sense? All right. So the reason why this is important, what's the criteria for listing 70 people as opposed to 66? Or 70 plus the wives and grandchildren? Because he's specifically speaking of people, Jacob plus those that came from Jacob's loins. All right? At this point, there were 70 people that were recalled in the story. Later on, they either learned the names of 5 others or supposed there were 5 others, and they were incorporated into the biblical text in a later redaction. Redactions happen all the time in Hebrew Scripture. Centuries later, they'll go back and put something in that they later learned about wrong. Absolutely, happens all the time. You can see it within manuscript history. And so the Septuagint actually records 5 more people, and so it changed the sum to 75 in the text. That makes sense? So Stephen's reading Septuagint, we're reading the Masoretic text. Is either one wrong? No, they're just different tallies based on different circumstances. So I just thought I'd mention that to you. Kind of cool, huh? Kim?
Does the Genesis count? I heard something about sons and wives. Were they counted in there?
Give me a second, I want to look. Let's see, sons of Dan, sons of Naphtali, sons of Bilhah. It says, all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 3 score and 6. And then it says, and the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 3 score and 10. So he apparently includes Joseph, 2 sons, and then whatever other number he uses, one other figure he uses to arrive at 70 in his counting, but he does not appear to include wives. Just those who sprang from the loins who are now part of the actual bloodline. Because I have Brit blood in me. My children have Brit blood in them, right? But my wife does not. I mean, what? Amen. 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 We're thankful for that. Amen. Yes. Yes. Peacock, right? So Brit, Peacock, and now our children aren't Brit, Peacock. They share Brit blood. It is fair to say that they are of my lineage. Amber would not be considered part of my lineage. She's part of my children's ancestry, but not part of my lineage. So that is the criteria by which they are established. So kind of cool, huh? That's pretty interesting. Now, you're going to come across some parts of Scripture as you read it seriously with an intellectually honest approach that you might look at that and say, that doesn't make sense. Well, be careful when you say it doesn't make sense, because number one, it might have made sense to the ancient authors. It might make sense in a way that you don't know yet. Or 3, there might just be discrepancies in the story that overall add credibility to the story. I'm thinking of the resurrection account. The resurrection account is the one central thing upon which Christians place their faith to be Christians. If it weren't for the resurrection, look, there's a lot of things I can do without in Christianity. I can't do without the resurrection. That's the whole thing. And yet, the biblical authors seem to tell the story just a little bit differently, each one. But you know what's really cool? Is they all tell the same story. Jesus rose again. Some have two angels, some have one. Some have like one, and maybe you can see the other one, right? Some have at the foot, some have at the, you know what I'm saying? This does not shatter the reliability of the resurrection account. Again, to me, it bolsters credibility because they would be very clearly copying from one another if they all said exactly the same thing. J. Warner Wallace does a tremendous job of examining these accounts as a former atheist and forensic examiner and said, this looks like exactly what you would find if you were interviewing 4 different eyewitnesses. Kind of cool. All right, moving right along. Scene 2, Egypt. Gosh, this is so cool. I can stay here till 2 o'clock. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you feel that way because that's what we're doing. No, I'm just joking. All right, here we go. Scene 2, Egypt. Jacob sends Judah ahead of him to Joseph where they begin to settle in Goshen. Joseph gets in his own chariot, and intercepts his father as he heads to Goshen. They have a beautiful, sentimental reunion full of tears and joy. And I was typing this and I stopped and I thought, what would it be like? I was actually, you know what I'm doing? I'm listening to a song, instrumental song by Josh Garrels, one of my favorite Christian musicians. He's probably my favorite living Christian musician. In fact, he is absolutely my favorite living Christian musician. Favorite musician of all time, by the way. He's been lauded by secular music critics and Christian alike. It's fantastic. And he was playing this instrumental song, and I really liked it, and it made me feel things. And so I looked at the title, and the title was Evangeline. And I was like, oh, Arabella Evangeline. That's my daughter's little name. And I started thinking about my daughter. And then, and again, that's right when I'm studying this text. And I thought, what if I thought my daughter was dead when she was 17? And then I learned she was alive. Can you imagine the joy when I finally get to see her again? Come on, saints, this is huge. The Bible says that he fell on his neck weeping. There's only so much that text can convey. We're forced to engage our imaginations a little bit. But I hope that you're willing to engage yours to see this reunion on the road to Egypt. Fantastic. So Jacob, now full of contentment, says, I've seen your face, now I can die because I know you're alive. Imagine that kind of love, right? Ooh. The guy is at this point 130 years old. And he seems to give the impression he was just hanging in there to watch him, to see if he, you know what I mean? To see his boy, I don't know. Joseph now tells his brothers, hey, I'm going to go get this finalized with Pharaoh. Make sure when he asks, he's going to call you and he's going to ask you what you do. Make sure you're very specific in your answer and you tell them that we are shepherds. We're going from shepherd. What we do is shepherding. You name it, we do it. Gossip sheep, we are not bad at what we do. Oh, that was good, man. All right. Forgive me. All right. So Joseph said, this way, you're going to make sure that you get the land in Goshen. Why? The text actually gives you a little clue. I love the text giving you little clues. They did the same thing for Joseph at the feast, right? Where the Hebrews were not welcome, right? So the shepherds were actually like universally despised in Egyptian culture. And so if they were shepherds, they would not integrate well into high society in Egypt, right? They had to be given their own place. You see. Joseph, smart dude, knows that. Ahead of time, he promises Goshen to his dad and his brothers, knowing exactly how he's going to get it from Pharaoh. All they have to do is answer the question the right way. Kind of cool, right? It's really neat. I love thinking about this stuff. Anyway, so he said, yeah, answer the question this way, and you're going to be given Goshen just for our family. So they do, and the plan went perfectly, but Pharaoh noticed something about Jacob when they talked. He was old, older than they lived in Egypt. I'm quite sure. Because he just meets Jacob, Pharaoh does, and he goes, how old are you? Literally, no, you don't believe me. Look at the text. Chapter 47, verse 7. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, hey, it's good to have you here. I really appreciate you being here, and I'm really glad we're able to take care of you. No, opens right up, right out of the gate. How old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, listen, I'm 130 years old. I'm still not even as old as my ancestors were when they died. And then he blessed Pharaoh again and left. school meeting. I'm sure that's not all they talk about, but it's just interesting that the author chose to include that question. How old are you? Also, I noticed this right toward the end of my studying, so I didn't put it in my notes. Joseph died before at least most of his brothers. Because when he's dying in chapter 50, he tells his brothers, gather my bones and take them back home. They did not live as long in Egypt. I don't know, it's just kind of interesting, right? I'm quite certain that that's what's going on. There's a life expectancy difference based on what they ate, right? Come on, of course there is. Of course there is, right?
Let the other bacterial problems.
Oh, yeah.
It's fascinating also that like their diet, the summer, the heat and humidity of the area,
Yep.
it's fascinating. Different life expectancy in different countries.
Now, what's crazy is and we're very smart and we're very intellectual, and so we read the Bible and say, well, there's no way somebody could live to be 130 years old and still be perfectly confident. Well, he was nearly blind, okay, so let's not pretend like that doesn't have an effect. But, just like Pharaoh, we wouldn't believe somebody was that old until we actually saw them. Interesting, right? If we look back and we say, well, it was really an exaggeration of ages and things like that, I'm open to that possibility. But I'm also very open to the fact that the world as it was then is very different than the world as it is now. Just throwing that out there for you. And we could have a lot of fun talking about flood and hyperbaric chamber and all that fun stuff, you know? Kim. Exactly right, Kim. Just like Bilbo and Rivendell, yes, yes. So anyway, he said I'm 130. And he's like, all right, cool talk, good stuff. Scene 3, Joseph the wise. Let's just do a really quick overview of something that Joseph did that I think really, oh, this is awesome. The next part of the text records something reminiscent of Jacob's earlier cunning with Laban, like father, like son. Okay? Joseph takes full business advantage of the famine while being completely generous and righteous. I'm not going to tell you what he did, and this is probably part of the story that if you're not acquainted with it, you can get acquainted with it. And if you kind of are, then this will fill in the gaps. Because again, those last 10 chapters of Genesis, we kind of know the basics with the whole silver cup and Benjamin's sack, but there's so much more stuff that takes place in the story. Anyway, so here's what happened. As the famine worsened, Egyptians came to Joseph and said, this is getting really bad. We don't have any more money. We're going to die. So Joseph said, all right, give me your livestock. Because you don't have any money to continue feeding them. We have the goods. So give us the livestock and I'll give you a year of food. You know, Joe? Better to be a living dog than a dead lion, right? Politically Ecclesiastes again. Sure, that sounds like a reasonable deal. Okay, the next year, it happened again. Joseph, our food's gone. We don't have any more money or livestock. Will you buy our land this time? They suggested. And they said, and with this exchange, since you're going to be buying our land, we're going to be tenants. So the work we do on the land, we're servants of Pharaoh. See how that works? So Joseph says, yeah. And I'm going to give you seed, not just to eat, but to plant. He says, 4/5 are for you and your family. It's all in the text. You can read it later. 1/5 is for Pharaoh. And so it was that there was a rule in the land that was established that 1/5 for Pharaoh was the way it was. And by the time this actually got to being written down in Moses' day or later, the author actually says, until this day, that custom still exists. 1/5 for Pharaoh. Kind of cool. And it just shows the origin of how that started, right?
Do you know if there was any other, I mean, I know paying tribute is a very common thing in kingdoms. Do you know if there's any other people that were paying tribute like that in the area?
If I understand it correctly, minimal tribute was paid by citizens to their own king, but tributaries were often cities that were conquered by those kings, and because they ruled directly over them, and they may have under kings, the Romans did this with Herod, the Samaritan, who was half Jew, half dog, right? And so they felt he would be the perfect prefect or under king, right? Governor. To enact the tribute money from the Jews for the Romans. But the Romans were not taxed as heavily as the Jews, if I understand it correctly, and that's one of the constant sources of frustration. So the Egyptians, this was a new arrangement for them, because now they were giving 1/5 of all their stuff. I think if anything, existed before, it was no more than 1/10, typical 10th, that you get to honor. 1/5 was double what the tithe would have been. Does that make sense? So this was a new arrangement where now they had to pay extra, but at the same time, 4/5 still belonged to them. This was remarkably generous of them to do. Because you know what happens when you sell your livestock and you sell your land to a landlord? You have nothing. And if you would say, you get to live here and I'm gonna feed you, he could say 100% of this goes to me and I'll give you back whatever I else is. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, the exception, the Egyptian priest, they were already on state subsidized land. So they didn't have to pay back 1/5 because they were already given an allowance by America, there's some lessons here for you, man. There's some lessons here for you. Yes, there are. There's some lessons for Americans because sometimes when we don't understand that here's a great example. My family, we've been the recipients of EBT, SNAP benefits, for a long time. And that's coming to a close pretty soon. I've got a good job, my income's going up. Great, it's for a time. But what happens is when you're on EBT, you know you're not allowed to get more than $2,000 to your name. Understandably, from one perspective, because if you've got a big loaded bank account, you don't need EBT benefits. I get that, right? On the other hand, now my personal income is set by a big government, right? I'm not saying that it's an immoral rule. Again, you're going to give money, you can set rules. You get it. But at the same time, the borrower is servant to the lender. That is just the principle of how it works. And my income cannot go past a certain point, and if it does, I go, now there were exceptions, tax return, COVID breaks, I get that. But even if you win the lottery, they say, we gotta know about that, right? And again, it's because they don't want to be given EBT benefits to people who are swimming in cash. Scrooge McDuck, you know? Yeah, ducktail, beach dance, you know, you get the idea. So, but the whole principle is, when you receive that handout, and I'm not downing in it, I just told you, that's why I led with this, my family has received those for years. There is an exchange, always. Sometimes that exchange can be quite unjust, sometimes it's not. But just something to keep in mind, that when you go to Pharaoh and you say, I will sell you my land and my livestock, because I can't live without your stuff. I don't have money to buy it, so here's what I do have. And what they effectively did was sold themselves into bondage by saying, I don't have the ability to provide for myself. I need you to provide for me. In times of famine, it's a lot more understandable than in times where there's not a famine, there's just only a famine of good work ethic. Sometimes there's a famine of labor too. Other times there's a famine of character. I'm not a bootstrap guy. Well, you can pull yourself up hard, bootstrap and get to work. I'm not. Definitely not. That's important, and I think Jesus would be very bothered by that. That being said, a lot of places hiring right now, and I don't pretend that it's perfect. I don't pretend. I'm not. I don't have all money. I don't have a background where I had a 401k and it doesn't work, you know. And I recognize that there's a lot of hardships and a lot of flights. But my only point here. I'm going to wind this down. My only point here is that there are lessons to learn from the scriptures about principles and economics and government as to how to righteously and in a Christ-like way help people without dehumanizing them or depriving them of the opportunity to make something. Just throwing that out. All right, scene 4, second to last scene. Meanwhile, house Jacob was living and thriving in Goshen. The time drew near, though, that Jacob was to die after 17 years in Goshen. He called Joseph and made him promise, swearing on Jacob's blessing of posterity to bring Jacob back to the promised land to be buried with the people. There was a theme of blessing going on in Jacob's life. I told you, and it was a little uncomfortable to talk about, but we had to talk about what it really meant, that when Jacob wrestled with the angel of the Lord, the hollow of his thigh was talking about the place in between his two thighs. He punched him, dislocated his hip. The punch was so hard, and it was a symbol of Jacob has all of this blessing, has all of these children, and does not appear to have had any children after that. The blessing was now no longer bound in his loins, as blessing was seen as in the loins since Adam, right? Now the blessing was seen from God. That's why Jacob said, give me a blessing. You see what I'm saying? That would only make sense if his blessing had been taken from him. Did that make sense? See how that works? So now Jacob says to Joseph, put your hand under my thigh. The Hebrew word for thigh there, it is the word thigh is a euphemism in our Bible. Can we accept that and be okay with that? The word testimony. Again, I'm not being gross. You know me. I would never be carnal or goofy up here about sensitive situations like this. But the word testimony comes from a Roman practice in which they would place their hands on their testicles. Again, I'm not being gross. I know my audience. And they would swear on their own livelihood, posterity, and everything that was seen as the center of their ability to reproduce and be strong. Does that make sense? They would swear on that. Testimony, right? This is an early example of such a testimony. He said, place your hand on my thigh. And we say, oh, that's gross. Different culture, different time. And what he was doing was he was swearing by Jacob's posterity, by all the blessing in their bloodline, by implication his own blessing in bloodline. You see how that works? On all the line and the promise of God in the bloodline of House Jacob, he was now swearing that he would return his bones to the promised land. Makes a little bit more sense when you look at it from a less sanitized and more real way. You say, Pastor, that's weird and that's gross. Yeah, but you show up at Gospel Baptist Church and you know I'm going to tell you the truth, amen? All right, we got a couple of them. The others are like, I don't know what I just heard, right? But hey, that's what the text says, all right? Okay, good stuff. I think, all right, no, moving on, amen, moving on. Okay, and honestly, as goofy and a little awkward as that is, it's an amazingly powerful picture of God's blessing passing down through the man, through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Joseph is swearing on a continuation of that blessing bloodline that he would take Jacob up. It was basically much, much bigger than swearing on your father's grave. It was swearing on your father's grave, your brother's grave, your children's grave. It was all the blessing of God was represented in that promise. So, not long after this, Joseph is summoned to Jacob's side because his father is ill. He blessed Joseph and his son, but he blessed the younger first, not the oldest. Right? He's like, hey, put my hand on the younger one, and Joseph's like, oh, Dad, I know you can't see real well, but you actually put your hand on the younger one. No worries, let's just swap them around. And Jacob says, no, I didn't make a mistake. Because where the world says, the oldest son is the first one, the best one, the strongest one. But if you go all the way back to Genesis, Cain and Abel, right? Yeah. Oh, didn't I mention that Abel was the exact same word as Abel? Yeah, because the whole idea of meaningless, vanity, wasted is associated with Abel's life, did the right thing, but was still cut off. God was undoing the violence that came out of Eden in restoring Eden in their home. Come on, man. This is huge. It's awesome. All right, so we're gonna cover that. We're gonna cover that right at the end. So we're not going to dive deeply into each one of these blessings, but if you read them, you will find prophecies of Jesus Christ. After this, Jacob dies. Joseph secures Pharaoh's permission to bury his father in Canaan. I didn't include this in the notes, but it's really cool that he was embalmed, and for 40 days, the embalming process, they would pickle the body. You say, Pastor, you're being me. I'm not. They would pickle the body. That's how they embalm. And during that embalming, pickling process, all of Egypt mourned for Israel. Interesting. Because of Joseph. Oh, there's so much there. Jacob was then returned home and buried in the same cave in which Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah were buried. Now, I meant to go on this rabbit trail, but I didn't. Wasn't there a thing where Rachel, Isaac, Rebekah, Rachel, Leah. Okay, I'm getting my patriarchs mixed up, but wasn't there a thing where Rachel, like, it's okay if you can't answer this, I'm thinking out loud. I think there was a reason, a theologically significant reason why Rachel was not mentioned. I think that there was a curse on her, where she would be, right? Yes, that it was linked to that, that's right. And didn't he say something about how like, something about the blessing being moved, or I can't.
Maybe whoever stole these.
Yes. And it was her, and she was never found out. He did that, right? They took me over time. And I don't read Rachel's name here. I read Leah's. It's kind of interesting, right? But we don't know exactly what went down. We don't know what the situation was, right? Yeah, and it was it Mamre? Was it Mamre? Yeah, but it wasn't Machpelah, which is a picture of Eden. So there's something really cool there. So she,
She was buried next to the tree along the road.
right,
There's a tree that didn't remember life.
That's right.
That's why when they got there.
and the tree symbology and the tree motif is huge in Genesis, but Eden was Machpelah. That was, we'll get to that actually in like one slide. Anyway, really quick. I don't know what time it is because my phone is used for the slides. Don't look at your watch, don't tell me. What is it? Is it 12? Is it good? Oh, we're doing great. I thought it was earlier. I mean, we'll get you out of here soon. All right, no, good. Okay, 10 more minutes. Once Joseph's brothers saw that Jacob was dead, they were terrified. They said, surely he's going to seek retribution now. This is huge. They even told Joseph. They came up to Joseph and they said, hey, Joseph, while you were out of the room, Dad had a special message just for you, for us to give to you that he didn't tell you for whatever reason. He wanted us to tell you. Joe, listen, Dad said you have to forgive us. And I know you may not want to, but Dad said to do it. So, you good? You cool? Many scholars think they were lying. I don't profess to be a scholar, but I don't think that they were telling the truth either. I think Jacob had plenty of time with Joseph, and if he wanted to say something like that to Joseph, he would have. But the brothers come to him, and the way the text actually portrays it, the text seems to indicate that maybe they were making something up. Wouldn't be the first time. Anyway. They did what a lot of us do. We fear for our lives. We start scheming and doing things we might normally never do. The Bible says that for a man to provide for his family, he steals. Saints, I don't know what the word sin is. Taking some Wonder Bread from Hanford or letting my family starve to death while I watch them. Thankfully, I don't know that we're ever really in that position in the modern West. But what if there was a time? I think a lot of our ethics would be quite bendable. All of a sudden, we'd all turn into Gumby. You know? What's that?
Ladies Rob.
I'm so sorry?
Name is Rob.
Ladies Rob.
Oh, Les Miserables. Yeah, I was like, Flaming
No,
Rob.
no,
Was it
no.
another Kool-Aid? No, Les Miserables. Exactly right. Yeah, the whole theme of that one, Russell Crowe got in. I didn't see that. I know it's an older look than Russell Crowe, I promise. All right. So anyways, I think they made up the story. And then Joseph, of course, says the very famous and memorable and meaningful words. He says, am I in the place of God? Now, many thought that he said, am I in the place of God? Because they're like bowing to him and saying, we're your servants. I don't think so, because he was totally cool with them bowing to him before. It was really fulfilling the prophecy. Okay? I think he was saying, I'm not going to play God. I'm not going to take your death in my own hands. Interestingly, as the elected official of Egypt, he had the right and responsibility to do that. But his brothers weren't under his national jurisdiction at this point, I don't think. And especially because they were his brothers, I think it would have been morally right for him to recuse himself from such a case as well. But I think for Joseph, it wouldn't have been playing God, especially because he wouldn't have been killing them for the crime they committed in his jurisdiction. He would have been getting back at them for something they did to him decades ago. Make sense so far? All right. So he says, I'm not going to play God. You meant all of this for evil, but Elohim Hasab, God meant it for good. Oh, brings it all together, doesn't it? It's so cool. So don't be afraid, Joseph said. I'm going to provide for you and your children. Joseph lived for 110 years and then died, but only after promising his brothers that God would bring them up out of Egypt and back to the promised land. When that happened, they were to bring his bones back out of Egypt and back home to be buried with his fathers. Joseph is risking another baker and butler situation, isn't he? And so the book and the story ends with Joseph's burial in Egypt. So I want to visit this theme. We made it through a mini-series on Joseph that lasted a couple of months. Let's take a few minutes and sum it up well and right, okay? In this whole story, there's been multiple hyperlinks, if you will, references back to Hebrew stories with meaning and direction. Let's talk about them and what they mean for the reader, you and me. Or the reader thousands of years ago and the reader today. Same truths. Let's go back to the beginning. When we met Joseph's sons in the text, did we start with the firstborn? Now, Jacob, did I say Joseph's son? I meant Jacob's sons. If I don't fix it now, I'm going to do the Sunday afternoon recap. I'm going to pull a Kevin, and I'm going to do this. Yup. There it is. Done. Look how easy that is. Technology. Remember, can you believe that was like a slide, like a Kodak slide in one of those carousel projectors? That's been a 3-week process. Now it's a 3-week process. Anyway, no, we didn't start with the firstborn. We started with the youngest. This is a reference back to the exaltation of the youngest over the oldest, starting with Abel, Jacob the supplanter, right? And so on. Jesus, by the way, was not the oldest Israelite. Say what? You get it. He was the younger brother. Jesus was the younger brother. And his older brothers, the established Jews of the temple system, hated his guts because he showed up and said, oh yeah, all you guys are going to bow to me. And then what did they do to him? Well, they threw him in a pit, the heart of the earth. Come on. I mean, it's, I didn't love it. I just want to explode. All right, good stuff. Next. Observe how everyone is a shepherd in the story. Abraham, Isaac. I know I've gotten this terrible habit of whenever I read a patriarch's name, they sound Hebrew in my head, and I'm literally writing them in English. I'm not doing that to be a know-it-all. It's just a goofy idiosyncrasy. You guys probably all have them. Just like when I read the word burial, I pronounce it burial in my head because I don't know why, and I have to fix it on the fly every time. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Jacob's children are all shepherds. Check this out. Again, these are themes that we're meant to see all along the Genesis scroll. I'm pointing them out. The role of a shepherd is a role that divides from one's brothers. Cain and Abel, one was a shepherd. Lot and Abraham, they were shepherds, divided from their family. Laban and Jacob, shepherds. Division. And then the fact that Jacob's sons were all shepherds put them in Goshen and divided them from the rest of the Egyptians. See how that works? Being a shepherd is now being crafted as a dividing role. Jesus was the shepherd. Pastors are called to be shepherds. Moving right along. Amen. Oh, we feel so bad for you, pastors. Don't feel bad for shepherds. Awesome. I have the best church in the entire world. But as this world gets yuckier and yuckier, they're going to want us in Goshen. In Goshen. Get into Goshen. And then what do they do? When you start flourishing in Goshen, what do they want to do? Come on, saints. It's too much to be made up. Exactly. Kim is exactly right. They're going to work you, and then God has to invent a week to teach you that 6 days on, 1 day off is what you need, right? It's even Susan. Oh, yes. Yeah, that's huge too. Oh, yeah, aha, okay, Egyptians didn't like shepherds. Hey, who else was a shepherd? After all this stuff, the guy who led them out of Egypt was a shepherd. No, he was the prince of Egypt. Haven't you seen the Disney movie? Yeah, but after he leaves, and after Mariah Carey sings, there can be scary souls, right? He goes out and works for Jethro as a shepherd. Come on, this is huge. And David did something, I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah.
He did amazing. I'm just saying, you have this crafted theme of shepherds. Now, some of y'all are thinking, man, I want to quit my job and go be a shepherd, because it sounds like there's some action-packed stuff going on in there. No, most shepherd lives were pretty dull. Until you were one of the shepherds that was out in the field fighting, keeping watch over your flock by night. What's that? Oh, yeah, yes. That never changed, right? Who would Jesus come to? He'd come for the king. No. No, he came for the shepherds. Why? Because shepherds capture the heart of God more than any other occupation. They do. Keeping track, giving their lives, exhausted. You don't get to clock out every once in a while for a break. Their lives depend on it. All right, this is going to land me in some serious hot water. Not here, I don't think, but it might. Might as well. Haven't made a fuss in a while. I don't understand the really long sabbaticals of pastors. I don't. If you've got a plethora of pastors in your assembly, I get it a little bit more. I do. And there should be a plurality of pastors. So it is permissible for plurality or plethora of pastoral pontification. All right. But a lot of these guys say, well, I'm just going to take off for 3 months. Trying to burst the back. I don't know if that reflects the heart of a shepherd. Yeah, right? The only job I see that really working in is like school teacher. You deserve those 3 months off. You know what I'm saying, right? Right?
I was gonna say maybe in time that actually losing faith, falling by the wayside.
Yes,
Just need to go back.
yes, agreed.
You know, if you're falling away from the flock.
That's good.
Thank you too much.
That's good. If your performance is suffering or you're sick, there's other shepherds. What, right? You're gonna say that?
No, I was gonna say also, shepherds were, either they were bred for this, like you have generations of shepherds, or
Yeah.
you picked a guy that didn't really need that social interaction, or need that break, you would do that, because that was your livelihood, that's literally your food, your income. So each person's different. I don't know if it's, I don't know, I think there's way more of a, it's correct, a crude way to say breeding pool pastures.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
more different, there's more varieties you have, especially in America, there's other ethnicities, other, what's the word I'm looking for? Subcultures or cultures.
Yeah.
that I think it feels it's more difficult, more or less difficult, but that's all. I don't know if I clarified it.
I think I get that. I do. I think I get that. Notice how it was the youngest brother's job to be the shepherd, by the way. Outside of Joseph, he was esteemed, he was exalted. But with David's situation, the younger one was the shepherd. I'm guessing that before he was the shepherd, his next older brother was the shepherd. It was something he graduated out of. But in Jesus' economy, when the hand goes on from Manasseh to Ephraim the other way around, in Jesus' economy, it's something he graduated up to, because the first shall be last, the last shall be first, the top will be bottom, the bottom will be top. And that's not to say, the role of the shepherd in the church is the best role ever. No, we're not talking about that necessarily. But interestingly enough, the spirit of the shepherd, serving, helping. We talked about this in our Sunday school hour. Nobody wants to. I know it's different from taking care of sheep, but I don't like picking stalls, and I sure can't stand the smell of someone cleaning out a horse's hooves. It's gross. Somebody's got to do it. And in Jesus' economy, the guy who's down there working hard, getting dirty, without advertising how good he is all the time, that is the top in Jesus' economy. Does that make sense? Really quick.
In regards to what you were saying, you don't understand pastors taking that sabbatical. I was part of a church that the pastor believed every 5 years, you heard this from a different pastor before him, in the same church. Wrote, a letter from that pastor and said, let your church every 5 years give you a month off, along mentally, spiritually, and physically.
And I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, right? I'm thinking of the one that, the mentality that basically says every year or two, be gone for 3 or 4 months. That I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's healthy at all. Was that? Right, and I've seen that too. Now again, if there's a plurality of health and there's a healthy pastoral leadership in play, I think it might be a different story, right? But I do think it has a lot to do with the heart. I'll close with this illustration at this point. I think we're doing great. We're doing awesome. We're all doing okay. At my job, right, a secular job, it's not a secular job, it's very much a Christian job. I love it. Ironically, we have a very generous pool of time off, vacation time. I choose not to take it most of the time because there's work to be done. I'm trusted to do it, and I do it. And you say, oh, Pastor, this became the praise Michael Britt show. No. My point is, when you have a passion for someone and you love the person for whom you're working, I know it's very different than a regular. I need you to listen to what I'm going to say. Don't just tune me out after what I just said. Please, very important. I love my boss. I feel very called to my job. And because of that, it is not the same to me as U.S. Cellular was. Because I can guarantee you I take every drop of vacation time from U.S. Cellular, every single drop. But this job is different because to me it's not a job. See how it works? That's my point. When pastors view, under shepherds, when they view the sheep as just a job, you're going to find that a lot more. Well, I didn't take a vacation, get away from the church and clear my head. I don't like being away from the church to clear my head. I love you. I actually like being around you.
So we distinguish between a hireling and a shepherd.
Yeah.
Hireling will run the shepherd stands the ground.
That's exactly right. And I really like what you said, Ray, about shepherds sometimes do need to recuse themselves if they're sick, if they're struggling. I can think of a few times where I could have benefited from saying, I'm out for a bit, right? But God has his providence and foreknowledge allowed me to pass through a lot of valleys without. But I'm so thankful that we do have Pastor Kevin, Brother Ray, other people who are qualified to be able to teach and take care of things for a while if we need it. All right, really quickly. Notice how Joseph's brothers tricked Jacob in a similar way that Jacob tricked his own father. A goat's blood used to soak Joseph's coat is very similar to the goat skin used as a coat. The theme is being revisited, the blood and skin of an animal. And they were both used to deceive and steal a blessing. Not a coincidence. Some of these things you might say are kind of a stretch, not to the Hebrew mind. They didn't think that way. All right, next and last, the theme of exile. This is the predominant theme of the story of Joseph. Joseph goes down to the pit, down to Egypt, down to prison. He lost everything. That is a picture of exile. Whenever Israel is exiled in Egypt, they are exiled down to Egypt. Their maps didn't look the same as ours, right? Everything was south. But look, Genesis 39:23 says God was with Joseph in the midst of his exile. Even when we lose everything, God is still present, though invisible and often imperceptible. The greatest form of exile is death. It is. That's how the Hebrew writers viewed death, as a form of exile. I'm going to prove it to you that we're going to eat baked potatoes and come a little closer to death. No, I'm just joking. Really, all right. The entire Genesis scroll is meant to help us understand that death is not the final event in someone's life. Take a look at this. This is where really gets good, I think. When Jacob died, he wanted to be returned to Canaan from Egypt, to be returned from exile back home to the promised land. Right? Why? With a sentiment? If we're all just a material girl living in a material world, it does not matter where our bones are after we die. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter at all. There was something that Jacob was doing. There was a message he was communicating. The place where he wanted to be buried was Machpelah, which is a parallel to the Garden of Eden. You got to check it out in the text. It's described just like Eden is. Now check this out. When we die, the final event may take place, I wrote may take place, forgive me, may take place in exile, but the Christian hope is that we are going back to Eden, the garden. Remember what Jesus said on the cross? Today you're going to be with me in the garden. Translated paradise, it's the same principle, same thing. The garden motif is used to represent God's space, the space where God dwells, the space where, you know how the Big Bang, the beginning of time, whatever you believe about the chronology of it, nothing exists, time or space, outside of the universe, which is rapidly expanding at 17 whatever billion light years, whatever right now. It's huge. Outside of that, there is nothing. Oh, you mean like black space? No, that's the inside. Outside of that, nothing exists. Time or space. And I can't understand that. Yes, you're not God. Listen, the God space is the dwelling place for God and humans together. I know I've gone long in the tooth, but we literally have like 8 slides left, which is nothing kind of about. It's used in the temple, it's used for Jesus, and it's used for pictures of heaven. God's space, heaven and earth intersecting. Now look at what Joseph wanted when he died. The same thing. Look, he too desired to be returned to Eden when he died, but look at how the story ends. What are the last words? Coffin in Egypt. You see that? Joseph died, and the end of Joseph's story in the Genesis scroll is not that he was taken back up to Canaan. He died in exile. And at the end of the Genesis scroll, we're left in suspense of what happens. And we have to wait 2.5 years for Disney to make the sequel. No, wait. No. Thankfully, we don't. We looked at the next page, right? Come on, Saints. It's great. Some of you don't understand my frustration about Doctor Strange. That's fine. Whatever. So Exodus opens up with this theme. So what does it mean for us? It means something very simple. We are all living in exile. Some of you may be tempted to try to talk your way out of exile. Oh, I don't live in exile. I've got a great life. And yes, we can have a great life in exile. I think there were many times, especially when they were in Goshen, the Israelites had an awesome life, but it wasn't where they were meant to be forever. The entire bloodline of Israel represents the life of the individual. You spend some time in exile. You can even die in exile, but the goal is to get back to the promised land. So, we sometimes try to convince ourselves, I know I'm going long in the tooth, I'm saying it again, thank you for your patience, I'm aware. We sometimes try to convince ourselves that, well, I have a great life. And again, we can flourish even in exile because God is with us and can bless us. But let's not pretend that it's so good that we never want to get back to Eden. We must always keep our eyes on the final prize of being together with God, because that's where we're supposed to be. God, Jesus, is our Eden. And while we are here on earth, our job is to manifest Eden everywhere we go. It's a fantastic analogy. And I'm glad that God came up. All right, last couple. For those who follow Jesus, death and exile is not the end. It's simply a place to sojourn. Right? Egypt, place to sojourn. Those who follow Jesus will have their bones returned to Eden, so to speak, and clothed with life. Ezekiel's vision ripped off of this for a little bit, the Valley of Dry Bones. We will flourish in the garden with those who've gone before us. I love that song. I bowed on my knees and cried holy. I saw Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Mark and Timothy. You heard the song? But I said, I want to see Jesus. Oh, beautiful. It's beautiful. You guys have to listen to that song. It's fantastic. But that's the whole point in this Eden, in the future state, whatever it looks like, with Jesus. We will see those who've gone on to the garden before us. So at the end of this scroll, all the themes of Genesis have come together to shout out these truths. Exile is not the end. God is with you in exile, and you will return from exile. So do what Ecclesiastes said to you. Live for God, love others, and work hard. It's the only thing to do in the face of the hopelessness of exile. Exile is not forever. Sometimes Christians, in our striving to prolong this life at any and all costs, what we're really doing is saying, please let us stay in Egypt for a little while longer. Please let us stay in Egypt for a little while longer. Does that make sense? Our culture runs from and fights death, and I'm not saying we shouldn't take an Advil or get our medicine, but maybe, just maybe, eating awaits. And it's better than eating. Does that make sense? I believe it. And I think if we kept that hope at the forefront of our minds, Egypt would look a little bit less like our current home, and Eden would look a little bit better. Anyway, that's the lesson. Lord, I love you. Thank you so much for the day. Thanks for this lesson. Thanks for the patience of the church body. I love it. I ask that you bless this time we have together for the day and for the food. In Jesus' name, amen. Ushers, let's take an offering. If you have a check with me, if I can